Okay, guys, I am going to do kind of a recap on the year. Not really a recap. I just feel like I want to tell you some points that have occurred to me during the year and some changes consequently I've made because of some points that occurred to me. And by the way, this is to give you better sound. I'm not sure I can love it. I hate anything that squeezes my head. That's why I fight my glasses. That's why I fight having my hair up. I don't like anything that causes tightness on my head. So I don't know if I can love this headset. I guess I'll call it. I don't know if I can love it or not, but we're going to try. If it gives you better sound quality, we'll give it a go. I don't think that this will be where I end up in the long run. Okay, so back to the subject is I just wanted to kind of go over some things with you this year. A lot of people have, not a lot, but some people have expressed interest in understanding the process that I use for inspection. And because of that, and because I approach the year, I like to approach the year as if I know nothing. That way, I don't assume anything that can cause me to make an error. I thought I would just kind of go over some things with you and bring out a few points about the year. So the first thing you should know is that way back in the early first year, um, I had decided, and I wasn't inspecting on my own at that point. You guys probably all know that story. But way back in that first year, as I was reading Joshua 5, I could see where the Israelites, when they came into the land across the Jordan River, that the manna no longer fell, and they used the barley after that. There's one verse, let me get it for you. There's one verse that says, it is in Joshua 5. It says, and the manna ceased on the morrow. I can't see it all, sorry. After they had eaten of the old corn on the land, neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat the fruit of the land of Canaan in that year. So I looked at this verse and I said, oh, the corn, the barley, replaced the manna. And so I had believed at that point that we were not to plant the barley because when they came into the land, it was standing ready, waiting for them. And I know that this may seem strange to some of you, but having just a early reference without experience, I knew that barley just literally grows everywhere in Israel, everywhere. And so I could see as easily as it proliferates, as it falls to the ground and reproduces, I could literally see that if Israel had been faithful, that there would not have been a need for them to plant the barley. But that was not the correct pattern and understanding of the scriptures. As I begin to dig more deeply into the scriptures, we can see, let me stop sharing this. We can see in Genesis that in the fall, the man was given a sentence and the woman was given a sentence. So let me show you that. Okay, we're going to go to Genesis 3. So this is the sentence to the woman in Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and I will bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Unto the woman he said, I'm sorry, that was on this a serpent. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, and in sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth unto thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread till thy return into the ground, for out of it thou wast taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. So there was a sentence that was given to Eve and to Adam. There was to the serpent too, but we're concerned about Eve and Adam right now. That the woman would bring forth children in pain, but she would still desire that intimate relationship with her husband. And the firstborn male that the woman was to bring forth is called Bikor or Bikorim. And to the man he was commanded that he would work the earth and eat the bread by the sweat of his brow. And the first fruits of the grains is called bikurim. So you have bikor, which is the firstborn males. You have bikurim, which is the firstborn of the fruits of the land. And the sentence was that the man was going to work the earth by the sweat of his brow. The sentence was that the woman would bring forth the children. So now we can fast forward into the commandments for the feasts, and we see that starting with Pesach or Passover, that everything is according to the males. They were to take a lamb according to the male. The men and the young men were commanded 3 times a year to go up to Jerusalem and present the Bikurim, the sweat of the brow, the fruit of their labor, as a first fruits offering in the temple to sanctify the rest of the harvest. The women in their sentence in pain brought forth these firstborn sons that were redeemed in this season of love and life on the land of Israel. So this was the sentence and the pattern that was established from Genesis. So seeing that the manna had been provisional in the wilderness and seeing it as an exchange for the barley in Joshua, and my errant belief that the men should not be planting the barley because it was ready when they came into the land is because I didn't understand the pattern established in Genesis. In fact, if we just reminisce a second about the telling of the gathering of the manna, let me get you that verse instead of just reminisce about it. Okay, we're going to Exodus. Okay. And we see that they were commanded, and the children, let's see, did 16:16. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating. So this is still a command to the male. Every man according to his eating. An omer for every man. According to the number of your persons, take you every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more and some less. And when they meted it with an omer, he that gathereth much had nothing over, and he that gathereth little had no lack. And they gathered every man according to his eating. So even with the manna, we see that the men are doing the work of bringing the bread to the family. This is that judgment against the man that we see. So the true pattern of that is that The field work was the judgment against the men, that they were the ones that had to bring it forth by the sweat of their brow. They were the ones that were commanded 3 times a year to go up to Jerusalem and to present the Bikurim of the whether it was grains or trees or whatever that season was, is that was their responsibility because that was their judgment. And the women in the same season, which I have done other videos on this, so I won't prolong it. In the same season, in this season that is called of Isaac's birth, the time of life, and is called in Jeremiah the season of love. Okay, they were to present their Bikurim, their firstborn sons, during this season. So these are the judgments of Elohim against the men and women, and why that actually and technically the men were required to plant the grains. Okay, stop sharing that. Um, so just a kind of little anecdotal thing is that it's kind of funny to me that among the religious in Hebrew, it's dati. Many times you'll see the men in the stores gathering and they're on their cell phone and their wife's on the other end and they're saying, what do we need? How many of this and what is that? And they're talking about the things that their wives have sent them to the store to gather by the sweat of their brow and bring home to feed their family. I mean, that's not the impetus behind it, but it tickles me that I see as many, I guess you could say, religious men are actually more religious men doing the shopping than you do see of the religious women. So what we have today is a group of calendar people who demand only the wild grains be inspected in Israel. And the theology behind that has been, and it's a good one, because unto this point, it's been a good one, because we really haven't, as a body, haven't had anybody in Israel that pays attention to the grains from the time they come up out of the earth and to the time they drop their seeds. The pattern has been, and the tradition has become, that only the grains in a wild field are acceptable to determine the calendar, which, biblically speaking, isn't truly what they did and has come to pass because we don't want to look at the domestic grains that have been watered and manipulated. There's a verse in Deuteronomy. Hang on, I'll get that. Okay, we're going to go to Deuteronomy 11. And we're going to start in verse 8 because 8's an important verse. Therefore shall you keep all the commandments which I command you this day, that you may be strong and go in and possess the land, whither ye go in to possess it, that ye may prolong your days in the land, which the Lord sware unto your fathers to give unto them and to their seed, a land that floweth with milk and honey. For the land whither thou goest in to possess it is not as the land of Egypt. From thence ye came out, where thou sowest thy seed and waterest it with thy foot as a garden of herbs. So we can glaze over this verse really quick, but what he is literally saying is, in Egypt you carried water by foot. You walked and carried water, and had to water your land from, probably he's referring to the Nile River. But the land whither ye go to possess it is a land of hills and valleys, and drinketh the rain of heaven. the water of the rain of heaven, a land which the Lord thy God careth for. The eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it from the beginning of the year, even in unto the end of the year. So the point of reading that is that indeed we should look at the grains that only Elohim waters from the waters of heaven. And indeed, that's why we don't use the domestic crops, because you can see the tracks where the sprinklers travel through the field and water the grains. I'm sure that there is also fertilization that goes on. However, we can read in the New Testament of at least a fig tree being fertilized. But we also know that the wheat that we eat today and that the world plants as a majority is not an ancient grain the way that the emmer is. And I'm telling you, there's sciences all over. Science says that the wheat is a crossbreed of anything from einkorn to spelt to um, oh my goodness, you can go find that the mother of all grains is like 3 or 4 different possibilities. Um, However, I'm very satisfied with using the emmer, but we'll get into that maybe later. So my purpose in saying that is that we do have to be really careful when we're looking at the domestic grains and understanding that they have a different gardener than the wild grains that have been observed for these 18 to 20 years, maybe longer, in the land of Israel. But the true command of the Bible was that we planted the grains. And I'm going to get you another verse. We're going to go back into Exodus. Start in 23:14. 3 times a year thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread for 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the appointed month of the Abib. For in it thou camest out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. We can't appear before him empty in the feasts of these first fruits offering, the sentence that was given to the men. 16. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labors, your work, which thou sowest in the field, speaking to the men, the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, the second half of the year, literally, when thou gatherest in thy labors out of the field. Or it should really read, after you have gathered your labors in out of the field. And then here's our verse, 3 times a year, all thy males shall appear before the Lord with what? These first fruits. Okay. So truly, we were to have planted the grains. But no one is currently planting these heirloom wild barley grains, nor, well, I am the heirloom wild wheat, but we'll get there. Okay, so yeah, no one is planting these wild grains on the barley. Interestingly enough, the grains that I harvested uh, of the barley this year from that, I'm just going to call it a miracle field because it is a miracle, was a miracle field. I did not end up grinding those and using them for the unleavened bread, the week of unleavened. I really had a stronger desire just to hang on to them and to use them to plant for next year. Now, as far as the wheat goes, I have been planting the wheat. This was my 3rd season of planting the wheat in the 7th month. In historical documents, in the rabbinical writings, all do support, let me get rid of this, do support the fact that the grains were planted in the seventh month. Why would you have to plant them in the seventh month? Well, if we're relying on the water from heaven, then we need those grains that are laying in the dry earth, dry, dusty, powdery earth where we've planted them. We need them to drink up every drop of rain that Elohim gives it. And so did have for 3 years planted the wild wheat in the seventh month. However, I was already approached this year by someone saying, um, I know you've got the wheat planted in your yard, but there's people who are rejecting it because it's not a wild field. And Elohim, in His great mercy, gave us a wild field this year. I just laugh. It's really like, I mean, there's no overtime for him. That's a human concept. But if I were human, it would be, if God were human, it would be like He was working overtime to provide for us this year abundant signs of His timing. So she said, if you could find the wild wheat that's ready rather than the wheat I'd been previously planting. Um, and I was thinking to myself at that point, boy, nobody understands that you don't see fields and fields of this wild wheat the way you do the barley. You see a patch here and there in the dry barley. As it turns golden, you can see patches, but you don't see fields. And I'm thinking, wow, that's an impossible task. and then, and then this year we were given that beautiful wheat field above the Kinneret. He loves us so much. He's so merciful. So, um, I do want to challenge some of your thinking in this area that the other thing is about the wheat that I have planted is there's been a lot of mudslinging over the years, and effectively they have blurred my reputation and made it questionable. Um, and that's not my battle. It's really not my battle. My battle, not even my battle, my responsibility is just to stand here or sit here or stand in the field or whatever and be as truthful and as transparent as possible. But it's really unfortunate that there's so much mistrust because of these annual body barley wars that are faced every year. It's really unfortunate. It really has a tendency to keep a lot of people who are sincere in darkness and following tradition rather than really embracing what God is providing. Um, and I do believe that my reports of what I see on the earth is a provision of God to the body. The other thing is we'll get into more of this later. I don't fear man. I really fear failing God. And quite frankly, if I can't hear his voice, I don't need to be doing this work. Okay, so we'll lay that aside. I kind of alluded to the fact that the biblical calendar is more than just the barley, and it's even more than just the wheat. Um, I have some videos I've made on that. I may be taking some videos down this year and redoing them because I don't know. I just feel like that vision of the annual calendar, the annual biblical calendar, has been sharpened, and it does. It gets sharpened every year. So I don't know. I may be taking some of those down and redoing them simply because the vision is sharper. But because I see 7 first fruits offering that were offered over the 12-month period, and because now for 3 years, but as we've just talked about, which was a prelude to what I'm saying now, actually, but as we just talked about, sometimes my vision gets adjusted. I go in thinking one thing, and over time, my Father graciously says, "Hey, you don't quite have it right. Let me fix that for you." But for the last 3 years of beginning to tap into this 7 first fruits offering, I have seen that at Shavuot, we need to have olives. So Shavuot before, after, really, really, really close in this time frame. We need to have the olive trees in bloom. We need to have the pomegranate trees in bloom. And this year I had a little nagging voice that said you also need to start looking at the date trees and making sure that you know when they bloom. And guess what? Lo and behold, they're blooming right now here at the Shavuot season. And they need to be blooming at Shavuot because we want the fruit of them to be ready in the 7th month for the time from Yom Teruah through the 8th day. These, and we'll get into, I'm not going to name specific timings at this point, but we need them to be ready as that final ingathering for that 7th month go up feast, the final male first fruits offering that they were required to present in the temple, as we were just reading in Exodus, that previous verse. Indeed, I'll do some photos on that next week. I actually did some videos, but my camera is so heavy. The one that I actually got for the new moon sightings that takes those beautiful pictures, it is so heavy. It is so cumbersome to handle handheld. Um, and I'm thinking about biting that financial bullet and getting a smaller camera that I have better dexterity with. This camera weighs about, almost 2 pounds. And that may not sound like a lot, but all of that weight is in the lens. And when you zoom it out, it's like holding a, the far end of a pole with a weight on the other side. So it's a real struggle to uh, maintain a fluid movement. And so I'm thinking that, yeah, anyway, I'm thinking that I'm going to have to bite the bullet and get a smaller camera for the field work because it takes 2 hands. And I end up using my cell phone a lot. It's several years old. The photography and the video on that is not so good. Long story short, I think there's another, whether you want to call it a toy or tool, in my near future for your sake, for your viewing sake. So these videos I made yesterday need to be redone, and I will go back out and redo them. But I will just tell you that the olive trees have been budded out for a month. And they're just now exploding in blooms. I didn't know that an olive tree could hold a bud for a month. Not that I know that much, but when I saw them bud out a month ago, I thought, oh, brother, these guys are going to be early, but they're not early at all. They're blooming just now. Of course, the tamar or the date trees, their tassels, their blooms are hanging. And of course, the pomegranates. The pomegranates don't look like they're overall, the pomegranate trees don't look like they're going to have a lot of blooms this year, but there are blooms on them. And that happens from year to year. Last year, we had a terrible year for the olives because they don't like so much water. And I'm just imagining all this very mild season that we had has not been favorable on the pomegranate trees. But those are ready with the wheat being ready. And so in the seventh month, we will have the three trees that are ready for the first fruits offering. This year, I really came to understand the importance for me of knowing when the grains came out of the earth. I had that desire in my heart last year that I would know the minute that the grains came up out of the earth. And thank goodness I did. And it's because I've planted that wheat over here in the property that I can readily check it on a daily basis. And as soon as those grains emerged with their little like blades of grass, which by the way, like that, they just kind of stick up out of the earth. By the way, grains are called cereal grass. All grains before they display their head or their fruit just looks like grass, just looks like something you mow in your front yard. So as soon as those little blades of grass emerged, I knew it this year. And I will be most happy to tell you that it really helped me go ahead and be brave enough to declare the barley to be ready so very early in the year because I had seen when those little blades of cereal grass had been born. And this is something that I will continue to look for year to year. And I do think it's very important if we're going to have an early flush of cereal grasses on the land to really know when they emerge um, or they exit the earth. Um, these one of the things that I'm learning is while the barley can go outside of its 90-day cycle, it still has an end of life. It terminates at a certain point. So knowing when the barley came out of the earth is really important. When I look at the field and I saw that early barley that was standing in that miracle field waving at me with their heads out of the boot or out of the body of the plant, uh, I was shocked, and yet I knew that we had had grains that were germinated and exiting the earth at a super early date. So that'll be something that I continue to do on a yearly basis is know when these grains come out of the earth because it is a good determiner. And so um, that kind of brings me to the wheat. And last week, that major struggle that I was having, and I had so many comments and nice encouraging words from people about um, don't let what others say affect me. And, and it really, what I was going through last week really didn't have to do with anything other than my own internal personal struggle. Um, we had, after the barley, we had 2 sessions of cold and even snow. And of course, the first snow, the other group said, "Ha ha ha ha! It's still winter. Um, does this look like the time of year when, like what they consider spring? Does this look like spring to you?" And I throw that term out. It's not a biblical term. All it's going to do is confuse you, like it confuses them. Okay. Does this look like, the beginning of summer? And even that, throw that word out. That's not a biblical term. It confuses them and it's going to confuse you. Summer is the word kites. Kites has everything to do with the grains, cutting grains, harvesting grains, the harvester. That root word has to do with everything harvest. So when they use those words from a 2021 perspective, it's just total confusion and chaos in the body. But they use these weather changes, or they weren't changes, the weather that Elohim provided that brought forth what we got this year. Uh, to say it was that I was too early. They used history to say I was too early, recorded history. Um, and so after the second weather, cooler weather session that Elohim had provided just about 2.5 weeks ago, and the grains had really slowed down in their ripening. I was watching the wheat I had planted here in the seventh month, and I was watching that it just wasn't progressing. And so my internal feeling was that I totally doubted at that point that I had determined the barley correctly. Um, I like what Norman says about Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16:9 has been spoken about a lot this year. And it says, 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such a time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. So when we put the sickle to the corn, we begin to number the 7 weeks. And he says, when we begin to number the 7 weeks, we put the sickle to the corn. They have to come together. I understand the same thing about the barley and the wheat, that if we have determined the first fruits of barley correctly, we should and need to expect that the wheat will be ready for Shavuot. And if the wheat is not ready for Shavuot, I have not determined the barley correctly. And if I determine the barley incorrectly, then the wheat will not be ready at Shavuot. And so that was my literal broken dismay in the week preceding finding the wheat in the field above the Kinneret in such an advanced stage, because I'm looking at what's going on in my yard and it's not progressing. And I spent the week on my face in front of the Father, repenting because I knew I had messed up, begging Him to make it right because I had tried so sincerely and honestly to represent Him. See, it's not even for me that you're depending on me. I understand that. But for me, it is that I feel I stand here and I say to you through the calendar what God is doing in any one given year. And if I can't hear Him, I don't need to be doing this work. So, literally, I was fully prepared this year to walk away from you all and never look back if I had gotten this wrong. Because whoever you are listening, it doesn't probably miss your notice that some of the most unforgiving people in the world exist in the genre of these barley wars. The other thing that I was going through is that I already knew people had rejected my witness about the calendar because I was the only one of the inspectors that had stepped out and said that we're a month earlier than the others, or that's not, I didn't say that right. I'm the only one that had stepped out and said that the barley is already ready to go. All of the other groups, it was pointed out to me, kept a later calendar. And so this individual went with them because he had multiple witnesses. Well, that's a whole nother can of worms I'm not going to open up here, but I don't believe double witnesses are needed for anything other than convicting a person of sin and error. You can't show me one pattern in the scripture in the scripture. I know what the Sanhedrin did in the first century with the new moon. I know what they did. You don't need to tell me about it. But in the scripture, there is no need for a double witness from someone who's known, their work is known, and someone who is of the body. There's no need for a double witness of a positive uh, thing, event, situation. So it is very hard, especially in a century when you've got pictures and videos, and I can take you with me in the field. At that point, you are all witnesses of what's going on. So it is very hard sometimes, and I question within myself um, my ability to hear. I fear him and I fear my flesh. I'm fully aware of how human and fallible I am. And so thank you for your words of encouragement. And I do value them. But please just be rest assured that all the mud that the other groups can sling does not bother me nearly as much as fear of Elohim and fear of my flesh and fear of failing him. Um, so the other thing to mention here briefly is that I hope in the near future to be planting both the wild wheat again and this barley that we brought in from this year's first fruits from the field here in the north, not as an indicator of a first fruits offering off the land because I'm the one that planted it and we have to offer the work of our hand. That's not the purpose behind it, but just to have, hopefully tourism is going to be opening back up in May. That's what we're hearing. At first, it's only going to be for tour groups, of course, vaccinated individuals. But I hope to be growing small areas of this in the future so that when people come to Israel that are aware of the calendar and they want to actually experience these grains, both the wheat and the barley, we have what to work with at a very convenient location. So that's my plan on that. The other thing I'm thinking about, which I know is going to come into some opposition, is taking some of the wild wheat this year and planting not fields. I don't have that much koach, inly koach. I don't have that much strength. But distributing some of the wheat in some of the other areas around the country in small patches so that we can just watch for in the South when that wheat becomes available. That's another subject we need to talk about very briefly, maybe before I end the recording, and that is the fact that it is more likely you're going to see a small patch of wheat growing someplace than a whole wheat field of wild wheat growing someplace. It is just the way that it is. It's the way that the Father has preserved the wheat. And it's so interesting to me that there has been a standard, a tradition set by the other calendar group on the type of terrain that wild grains are allowed to grow. It is so astounding to me that to this point, if I want to go out and find the wild wheat, I go to a rocky, sloped, east-facing area. And if I find wheat, it is always in that condition. It is always towards the bottom of the slope. Not that there won't be barley up on the higher edge of the slope. Wheat on the higher edge of the slope. But on the lower edge of the slope, I'm sure to find it. And it's always sloped. It's always a bit rocky. The wheat loves to grow in the rocks. And it's always been east facing to this point, which is probably why my wheat that I planted in the seventh month last year is behind the wild wheat in the wild fields because it's level and it does not face east. It just faces straight up. And so it's behind the wild wheat in the Galilee this year. Okay, I basically think I've covered all the points with you of uh, things that. One of the things I've understood this year now is because the last point, and we'll quit, and it's still on the wheat. Um, until this year, I thought that the Shavuot ended all of the grain harvests, but it doesn't. I found a verse that states that it's a blessing if the harvest continues to the vintage. Let me get that for you. We're going to go to Leviticus. Leviticus, we're going to do 26:3 because we need to see the context. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them. Now, this is speaking to a nation, not to individuals. Okay, that was part of the thing with the rain this year. There was literally a guy pointing at me and saying that the Elohim, is not happy with me because we were getting this weather. This was a couple of years back. We were getting this weather during our feast. So the Elohim is expressing his unhappiness with me. Well, read the read the Leviticus, read Numbers, read Deuteronomy, read the Old Testament. These blessings and cursings were against nations, not individuals. Individuals received a different kind of judgment than nations did. A ruler, a king, a nation could get the curse of having rains withheld. Go to Ahab and read about the story of how the drought was called because of a wicked ruler. Look at this. He's speaking to the nation of Israel. To the nation of Israel, he says, if ye walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then will I give you rain in its due season, and the land shall yield her increase. Now, here you're getting a peek into the seven first fruits, or the seven species. Will yield her increase, and the trees of the field. So the land is the grains, and the trees of the field, that's the other five species, shall yield their fruit. Then he says, our target verse, and your threshing shall reach until the vintage. So the threshing is the grains. The grains had to be threshed until the vintage, and the vintage is the grapes. And the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time. That's the seventh month when they sow the grains again. And you shall eat your bread to full and dwell in your land in safety. So because of the previous years, the wheat that I had been planting, being in the north and understanding that because we're on the same side of the hemisphere as the United States, that the South ripens more quickly than the North does. Being in the North and seeing the wheat ready every year before Shavuot, it's shattering. Um, I had determined by this pattern I'd been watching that Shavuot ended the grain harvest. This year, two things happened. Mercifully, God showed me that, Elohim showed me that verse this year, and I understand that it's a blessing when your harvest goes past to the vintage, to the grape harvest, which, by the way, is in the fifth month. But I'm talking about the ancient grapes, not the designer grapes. It's in the fifth month, okay? Because I understood that, I'm good this year that the wheat surpasses Shavuot. I wouldn't have been good if I hadn't have found that verse. So this is what I'm talking about, how the Father teaches me every year and how I have to adjust my vision every year. Um, so I no longer believe that Shavuot ends the grain harvest. I understand that possibly the calendar, I don't believe it was off last year, uh, because I was earlier than the herd. But last year, you know, I don't know. The barley was shattering last year, so we did what we did, and I did the best that I could. Father, forgive me if I missed something. But this year, I know that we're okay because we had the wild field above the Kinneret that was already past the harvestable stage. It was at the very, very, very beginning of what they would call, the other groups would call a B, meaning I cannot, well, here, meaning I cannot divide it any longer with a fingernail. Let me show you. This has been laying here. To show you how far past this is. This actually, since it's been laying here since, I forget which day. Yeah, that is like, I don't know if you can see that. I can't even divide it at all. Is there any dent? Yeah, there's really not any dent. Let's see if yeah, I can snap it. Okay, that's been laying there just a couple of days. That's like bone jarring popcorn kernel material. Anyway, so I'm really good with what we have this year and the timing of it. But it was a big flesh fight for me to work out my own fears before my Father and thank Him, praise Him that He's provided for us. We don't lack anything. And I am firmly committed to the fact that we have kept His calendar correctly this year, and He supplied everything we need to do so. So thanks for watching, and thanks for letting me be your eyes on the land. Forgive my humanness, my panic, my doubt, and Elohim willing, we'll be here next year doing the same thing for you. Shabbat Shalom. Hag Shavuot Sameach.